Next on Images Imágenes, Latino journalists discuss the issues affecting their community.
A lot of this anti-immigrant sentiment is based on false information.
Very widespread, and I find it very disturbing.
We've ignored the issue of media coverage for too long, and unless we address that issue, all the other issues that we work on are going to be in vain.
Monday nights at 10:30 p.m. in NJN, the New Jersey channel.
NJN has won 4 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards. Honored for their excellence in locally produced programming are Discover Tomorrow, The Campaign Inside, New Jersey Personalities, and cameraman Joseph Conlon.
WNJN Montclair, transmitting from Montclair State.
Next on Images Imágenes, Latino journalists discuss the issues affecting their community. Saludos, welcome to Images Imágenes. I'm Miguel Perez. The anti-immigrant current running through the nation and motivating Latino bashing. The movement to make English the official language, the invisibility of Latinos in the media and the negative portrayal of Latinos on television, the Clinton administration's ever-shifting policies toward Cuba and Haiti, and the refugees coming from those two Caribbean nations. Those are just some of the issues we'll be discussing here today with a panel of Latino journalists. Monica Rohr from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Jonathan Higuera from the Hispanic Link Weekly Report in Washington, and Yvette Mendez from the Newark Star-Ledger. Welcome to the show. Let's take them in order, some of these issues that I just mentioned. Monica, how do you feel about the immigrant bashing situation that's going on around the country? I guess it starts in California, but it's moving all over the place.
Oh yeah, I think it's very widespread, and I find it very disturbing because I just see it growing almost on a daily basis. And even more disturbing to me, because there's always been an anti-immigrant sentiment in this country. But what's most disturbing to me is now politicians are jumping on the bandwagon. You mentioned the proposition, Save Our State in California. And there's numerous dozens of amendments and proposals in bills before Congress now, which include anti-immigrant clauses or some, you know, trying to take away benefits from legal immigrants. In fact, one of Clinton welfare reforms, the welfare reform proposals, proposes to pay for welfare reform by cutting benefits to legal immigrants. And that's a new, I think, a new aspect where the anti-immigrant sentiment is also against legal immigrants. And as a legal immigrant myself, it's very disturbing to me that I could work here 40 years paying taxes, paying into the Social Security system, and when it's my turn to retire, find that there are no benefits for me because I'm a legal resident as opposed to being a citizen.
Well, this is a nation of immigrants, and so most of us should be offended by what's going on, but most of us are not. When they referred to Save Our State in California, for short, they call it SOS, as if they need help from us Latinos coming in.
And what's even more irritating is a lot of this anti-immigrant sentiment is based on false information. A lot of these politicians can't roll out any statistics or hard data to back up their very often racist statements that are being made. And a study which just came out last week that showed that immigrants pay out in federal taxes almost, not quite, but almost the same amount of you know, it's about the same, no, it's less than what they receive in benefits.
That study you're referring to, I think it was done by the Urban Institute out of Washington, and they were asked by the federal government to do this in a very unbiased manner and just give them the facts so the federal government can make some decisions regarding its immigration policies. And it's interesting that study did find that immigrants are costing states more than they're putting into. But if you look at the breakdown of that, the bulk of that, or a large part of that, is educating undocumented children in the public schools, which, you know, the Supreme Court ruled that we have to do that. So that constitutes the bulk of a lot of the expenses regarding undocumented immigrants. And I think it would be very unwise not to educate these children, because in the long run, I believe they're going to be, it would be more of a burden and more of a cost to have them not get an education.
I remember what you guys published in the Hispanic Link regarding the state of New Jersey, specifically on that Urban Institute report, and it said that while the illegal immigrant population costs the state of New Jersey $156 million, they give back $130 million. So the difference is not that great. And this is something that politicians refuse to look at. They want all $156 million. And as we see Florida, New Jersey, California, several other states suing the federal government for the whole amount. They don't want to look at what Latinos are paying in terms of taxes, from income tax to sales tax, etc.
Well, they want to have an easy target for to point to for their high property taxes and things like that. Oh, you know, let's just blame the immigrants, when in fact they're just not looking at other areas that can be revised or whatever.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, Yvette mentioned the racial aspect to it, and I think that's definitely a part of this, because when people talk about the border, they're talking about the southern border. They're not talking about the border between the United States and Canada. When people are talking about keeping immigrants out, they're talking about darker-skinned immigrants, you know, Latinos, Black Haitian immigrants, the Asian immigrants. They're not referring to, you know, the Irish or the refugees from Eastern Europe or the Canadians, you know. And there is that definite racial aspect that people are afraid of the other. And
and I believe there's a good lesson to be learned if we look at the responses of two state governors. One, Governor Wilson in California, who was really making his political gains on the backs of undocumented immigrants, and really all immigrants, because what's happening in the rhetoric, it's becoming legal and illegal, and no distinctions are made from some of these politicians. And that response in California, and compare that with Governor Cuomo's response in New York, which were two opposites. Governor Cuomo recognized their benefit, that they were adding to the tax base, they were revitalizing neighborhoods that were dead, and even the Republican Mayor Giuliani is not taking the stance that you would expect a typical Republican conservative stance that's being taken around the country.
Most of us were at the Atlanta conference where Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American journalists got together for the first time in a historic conference. And one of the things that was discussed there in a panel on immigration was Save Our State and the proposition that's coming up in November in California, which would make it illegal for you not to know, for you not to turn in an illegal alien if you know of one. So it turns the whole population into spies.
Essentially. And the teachers over there, and not to mention other state social service workers, are really up in arms about that. In fact, the president of the Los Angeles Unified School District said flat out she wouldn't implement Proposition 187 if it's passed.
And the fear in having this happen in California is that things that begin in California move around the country quite fast, as we have seen from the next topic I want to discuss, the U.S. English movement. John, where do you see that movement going? Is it sort of stopped? Has it moved forward lately? Is it still moving forward?
Well, it's funny that you brought up that subject right after immigration, because the two were kind of tied together. I think a lot of politicians are recognizing that if you've got an environment that's bashing immigrants, i.e. Hispanics, then you're one step away then from bashing the culture, bashing all Hispanics. And I think they see it's political opportunism. I think they see a door opening and they're running to it. They're submitting bills to the legislatures that they want to make English the official language, English only. And there have been some real good state legislative battles. Some, they've been unsuccessful, as in Delaware, where the governor pocket vetoed it. Other states, we have to wait and see, but it looks like they might.
What about New Jersey? What's happening here?
The issue, there's always a bill pending on the English-only bill, whatever, legislation. There's always something pending, but it's been kind of quiet, actually. But I expect it to, as election year rolls around again, for it to come back on the front burner. I think right now there's other issues that the politicians are trying to get into the newspapers about. And once things quiet down when it comes to those issues, and I'm talking about, for example, sexual offenders, then it'll be, let's bring out the English-only issue again.
Yeah. I was just going to mention that both the anti-immigrant sentiment and the bills that are pending of that, and movements like the English-only, they also lead that one of the side effects, and the most disturbing side effects, are the increase in hate crimes and the increase in crimes against members of those communities. I believe in California, since the rhetoric heated up about the SOS proposition, there's been an increase in hate crimes against Latinos. And it just kind of goes along with that. Once that starts heating up, people will start lashing out at anybody that they see might be from that group.
And the thing that adds fuel to that fire is the next issue we want to discuss, and that is how Latinos are portrayed in the media, especially on television, mostly in a negative light. Hate crimes are motivated by that, discrimination in immigration, the English movement, all of that is what we see on television. And the National Council of La Raza put together a study recently which found that Latinos are more invisible than ever when it comes to television, and when they're visible, it's as criminals. How do you feel about that?
Well, there was the recent film called The Paper about the newspaper business.
Yes.
It was about a New York newspaper, a tabloid, and they had one Latina in there. And I had high hopes when I first started watching the film, and then it turns out she didn't know how to do proper reporting, so the white men had to come in and save the day and save the paper.
Well, we all know about that, though. We've seen that happen in our respective newspapers.
Well, Michael Keaton was Batman, so I guess he's always playing the hero.
Well, I think that's typical of the way we're portrayed. I mean, it's like we're either, as you mentioned, criminals or incompetents, you know, somebody who can't speak English, who can't do what they're supposed to be doing, or we're just invisible. Or
the maids.
Right,
We're
or the maids,
always
the illegal immigrant maids. Yeah.
But you take sitcoms, for example. There are no Hispanic sitcoms. There are many black sitcoms. I think the black community has gone a long way in getting representation on television.
And this season there's an Asian American sitcom.
That's correct.
Yeah, but
What I found interesting about the La Raza study is not that they documented this. We all knew it was going on. I mean, any one of us could have followed television for a week and reached the same conclusions. But here you had a leader of a national Hispanic organization saying, we've ignored the issue of media coverage for too long. And unless we address that issue, all the other issues that we work on are going to be in vain. And I thought that was a key recognition of that in that report.
One of the other things is not only that most of the time we portrayed negatively, but when there are starring roles with Latinos in the leads, that often they go to non-Latino actors. You know, House of the Spirits is one example of that.
Which flopped at the box office.
Right, you know, it's about a South American family, a clan in which Meryl Streep, Jeremy Irons, Winona Ryder, and Glenn Close were the leads. I mean, it's just
they
pitiful.
got a couple of Latinos to fill out the background.
Right, it's pitiful that they could look around and, you know, kind of ignore all the Latino actors and actresses out there.
But maybe in part two, it may be our fault. Once again, I always bring up this issue. We're not vocal enough about wanting wanting to be in those roles. And number two, writers, perhaps, you know, there aren't enough writers that
representation is important. I think Unity, the historic conference that just ended, pointed that out, as we do every year, though. But if you don't have your level of representation in the media, then you're not going to get the kind of coverage that works, that is sensitive. Not saying that white reporters can't cover Latino stories, but it's been borne out, I think, in fact, that Hispanic reporters do a better job over the long run.
One of the other problems, too, is that not only are there not enough Latino writers or directors, but we're not in the power positions, producers, you know, we're not heads of major companies. And that's the same problem we have in journalism, that, you know, one of the reasons we're underrepresented in journalism is because we're not at the top levels, we're not doing the hiring. And if someone's not doing the casting, they might not consider a Latino for a role. I mean, they might overlook that.
Earlier you mentioned that in the movie about The Paper, the non-Latinos were given the big stories, although you needed a Spanish-speaking Latino. And it reminds me of what I have seen happening throughout the country in many newspapers in the coverage of the Haitian crisis and the Cuban refugee crisis in Miami. And that's our next subject. I spent 5 weeks in South Florida covering the situation. Of course, I speak Spanish. Spanish, but I saw a lot of others who do not speak Spanish from many major newspapers. I know they must have Latino reporters there, but they sent non-Latinos. And that is a problem, again, with what's going on as far as coverage of our Hispanic community.
Well, that is very irritating when you're reading one of these stories and you see that the reporter was speaking through an interpreter when there are Spanish-speaking people on the staff. That always just gets me right here.
Let's get into Cuba and Haiti and how the Clinton administration has dealt with those two refugee problems, as they like to see it. Haitians and Cubans like to see it as political problems. But the Clinton administration has decided they're refugee problems. And Monica, you were in Miami as well as I for a couple of weeks covering that whole situation. What is your perception?
Well, I think, and we were talking about this before the show, that in general, in the past, Haitian immigrants have always seen a double standard between the way refugees were treated and the way Cuban refugees were treated. Previous to the crisis, Cuban refugees were, allowed to come into the country and basically given almost instant refugee status. And now, all of a sudden those roles are reversed. And you were talking a little bit about what you saw when you were down there.
Well, no, I was in Guantanamo, and I was not only in the Cuban camp, but also in the Haitian camp. And when I went to the Haitian camp, I asked the Haitians, specifically what you're referring to. I said, when you complained about the double standard, did you want to be treated like the Cubans, or did you want the Cubans to be treated like the Haitians? And they said, of course, no. What we wanted was to go to Florida. We complained about the Cubans because we wanted to be treated like them. We never wanted the Cubans to come here. We don't want them to go through the same horrible conditions that we're going through. So there is a double standard now, but it's in reverse. Again, as we were all talking here before the show began, but we like to repeat it for our audience. What I saw in Guantanamo was that there is a new double standard. The double standard now favors the Haitians over the Cubans. And even the Haitians were admitting this because the Haitians say that they are now being given a sense of hope. A blockade of Haiti. Before we went in with our forces to Haiti, we were telling Cedras he had to leave tomorrow morning. We were not saying that to Castro. We were not blockading Cuba. We're not threatening to invade as we were for a long time in the case of Haiti. So the Haitians had a sense of hope. They were being held indefinitely, but it wasn't so indefinite for them. There was a hope that in the immediate future there would be a major change. Not so for the Cubans. And so that's why many people in the Cuban community are very offended by the change in the immigration policy. They say that, look, if you're going to change immigration policy toward Cubans to make it the same as you have for Haitians, then you have to make a change in foreign policy toward Cuba to make it the same as you have for Haiti.
Miguel, do you think the exile community would embrace Clinton doing what he's done in Haiti in Cuba?
Absolutely, but without any doubt in my mind, they would not favor an invasion. They would favor a blockade. This is what I sensed in Miami. They were calling for a blockade. They were calling for more sanctions against the Castro regime. They wanted the refugees to be treated like they were before the policy shift, but certainly not an invasion of Cuba. The Cuban Americans believe that if they blockade the island, the Cuban people will take care of Castro themselves.
But isn't the Clinton administration is getting their almost instructions from a very conservative segment of the Cuban population based down in Florida. And don't you find that somewhat frightening? That I don't think he's getting feedback from all segments of the population.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because that segment that you're referring to, the Cuban American National Foundation, headed by Mascanosa, is now under fire from the Cuban community. And they are seen not as too conservative. They may be seen in the American news media as too conservative, but in the Cuban community, they're being seen now as too moderate. The Cuban community believes that Mr. Mascanosa went into the White House, cut a deal with Mr. Clinton, and promised to deliver the support of the Cuban community when he didn't have the whole community behind him. And so now he's in hot water in the Cuban community because they feel he sold out the refugees in Guantanamo just so that he could get Clinton to impose stronger sanctions against the Castro regime as far as travels and dollars to Cuba. That's fine, but you also have to have a heart for your fellow Cubans. And they don't believe that Mr. Mascanosa is doing the best thing for the Cuban population in general right now, as far as I'm Cuban, as you well know, and what right do we have to tell other Cubans? We're lucky enough that we got in. Now, what right do we have to tell other Cubans, no, don't come because we need you over there to overthrow Castro, when we didn't do it ourselves?
Yeah, one state congressman, one congressman from New Jersey, I can't remember who it was, has suggested that Cubans here in America set up a form of government to be ready when Cuba falls, so that they can just go over and basically, I guess, take over. And I find that frightening.
Well, there are all sorts of proposals like that, preparing for the day of the downfall. The Cuban-American National Foundation has their own plan. New Jersey has a committee called the Free Cuba Task Force that's preparing for that. Florida has that kind of committee. But I mean, again, it's like in the people in Cuba, there's 11 million people still in Cuba. I think they're going to have a say in what happens in their country, on the day Castro's no longer there.
Did we just see yesterday that Castro was allowing for marketplace
farmers?
Yes, right, to come and set up.
They'll think of something new practically every day. But your idea about making Guantanamo, some people are suggesting that Guantanamo could become another Hong Kong. Where you build factories, you build a whole new community, and if you do that, then you're admitting that you're willing to while you build a new city in Guantanamo, then you're willing to accept Castro for another 10 years or so. And that's not, the most radical anti-Castro groups in Miami, what they're saying is, look, you will take Guantanamo, but we'll take it as a base to fight, to wage a war. I'm sure that's what you...
Yes, yeah. I mean, I worked in Miami for 5 years, and I also was down there, as you said. And my experience down there is with the Cuban exile community. The majority of them want a chance to fight against Castro on their own, or want a chance for the people in Cuba to fight. They don't want any kind of negotiations with him. They don't want the United States to negotiate with him as a legitimate leader, because they don't see him that way.
And that may be wrong. I mean, it may be time to take a different look at that. And maybe it is time to go and work with Castro, try to figure something out now, instead of waiting for when he dies and then what can happen. This is, I think, a perfect time for us to go in and negotiate.
I think he's just, I think he's just too wily to do that. I don't think that would be good, because I think he knows how to manipulate people. And I think, actually, I agree with the idea of a blockade, and I agree with taking a stronger stance against him.
Thank you, Monica. I didn't have to say it.
You have President Carter lambasting, ex-President Carter lambasting President Clinton for the embargo against Haiti, that it only affected the very poor, the poor of the poorest. So I know the circumstances and the forms of government are different, but yet I'm sure that attitude is carrying over, among a lot of segments of our society towards Cuba as well.
That the poorest get hurt.
Right, the embargo isn't hurting anybody but people who need it more.
But yet we're willing to go in and invade Haiti.
You had our vice president saying that Cuba and Haiti are like apples and oranges. And there's a lot of Cubans who want to say to him, yes, you're correct, but apples and oranges, because Cuba has been a dictatorship for 35 years, Haiti is 2.5 years. Cuba is only 90 miles away. Haiti is 600 miles away. There are so many other reasons why you should pay more attention to the situation. The human rights violations and everything else has been going on for a much longer time in Cuba than Haiti. So what's the urgency in going to Haiti and not Cuba? And so, if we're so concerned for democracy in our hemisphere, well, there's 2 dictatorships left. And let's deal with both of them if we're going to do it, and let's do it in a rational way, in an even way. And in response to what you're saying about Castro, Margaret Thatcher, I'll never forget what she said. She said, you don't negotiate with dictators, you conquer them. And that's the only way you're going to deal with Cedra's people in Haiti and with Castro. they will always find a way to stay in power.
I guess you're not speaking as a journalist, are you?
No, well, I'm speaking as a columnist that I am.
Well,
Yes.
we did that in
I have the
Panama.
right to opinion, and
did
also as a Cuban, of course.
We did that in Panama, and from recent reports, I watched the 60 Minutes report, they're not much better off, if at all, than before the invasion. I wonder if a similar situation is going to happen in Haiti and in Cuba eventually.
Yeah, well, they're definitely difficult issues. I mean, I don't think anyone believes that now that the U.S. troops are in Haiti that everything's going to miraculously be solved. I think it's very complex, and the issues down there are just so, they run so deep that, you know, you do wonder if anything will be resolved by an invasion.
Well, and again, the Cuban community is not asking for an invasion of Cuba. They would not like to see what happened in Panama. In fact, what the Cubans are asking for is the lifting of the neutrality laws. Cubans, you know, they always criticize Cuban Americans for not overthrowing Castro when their hands are tied. If they leave Florida on a little boat with a few arms, they confiscate the boat, the arms, and the people go to prison. You know, if the Afghans, the Nicaraguans had the right to fight for their freedom, the Angolans, why not the Cubans? And the answer is simply because Cuba has no borders. It's an island. So the only chance for Cuban Americans to go fight for their freedom is to go from Florida or somewhere in the United States. This is where we are. And if they don't let us, first, this is the argument that Congressman Lincoln Diaz-Balart from Miami always makes. He keeps saying, look, you know, our hands are tied. Why do we have to fight U.S. authorities before we fight Castro? And that is what's so limiting to the Cuban community as far as freedom is concerned.
I think one of the issues that's going to be raised here, and it's already been raised, we ran a column recently on it, is the issue of the overall Hispanic community and where they're going to stand on the Cuban issue. I know a lot of the Mexican-American community for years has kind of shied away from the issue, saying that's really not our issue. But now it's being thrust, it's on the national stage, there's no way that they can turn their back on it. And some of them are saying, well, I'm not sure if Cubans have been supportive of us in terms of our immigration needs and issues, and in turn, if we can be as supportive for the Cuban immigration situation.
Yeah, that
and
is.
I think that
yeah.
situation's coming up.
That topic is kind of discussed in the back rooms of bars and stuff, and you rarely hear it aired or see it in print. That there are differences among our groups, and yes, there has been tension. For example, between Cubans and Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans a lot of times feel Cubans look down on us, and
vice versa.
And vice, okay. And yeah, I think
that issue is
going to
real
be coming
one.
up.
It's a real one.
But then again, Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, Dominicans, when they see those Cubans dying at sea, when they see the people so anxious to get out of Cuba because they have to find another way out of hell, you know, if you're in hell, you want to get out no matter what the choice. They have to have some human
I believe
feeling.
there's a lot of empathy there when they see the balseros coming over and the empty rafts coming up on shore. But what about when the...
We have to take this another time. We can go on, but before we go, I'd like to ask you to tell your friends about our new time slot, Mondays at 10:30 p.m., and again on a repeat performance on Saturdays at 2 p.m. We're on twice a week now, right here on the New Jersey channel. I'm Miguel Perez, and I hope to see you soon on another edition of Imágenes. Hasta pronto.